Welcome to Talking Education from the Varkey Foundation. By entering conversations like this, you are helping to raise teachers' voices and give every child a quality education. Please watch, click, subscribe, and start talking education. Our vision is quality education for every child, through work in the classroom to the highest halls of government. This new decade brings the opportunity to release the vital conversations usually confined to conference halls to the 2.65 billion people that use social media. Education debates aren't the preserve of academics. Everybody deserves to be part of them. Together, we have an opportunity to advance and bring a diverse audience into our mission as we discuss education's problems, collaborate on their solutions, and most importantly, show the incredible work of those on the front line of education. Welcome to today's discussion on how can education challenge racism. According to the World Economic Forum, racism and discrimination is increasing as the COVID-19 pandemic spreads. Alongside this, rising nationalism, populism across the globe brings with it a politics that targets minority groups and gives permission for racism to thrive. Without doubt, racism is a growing reality. It would not be hard to feel depressed about the situation, but such pessimism is irresponsible. What we need is a coherent, planned, and powerful pushback against the phenomenon, backed by clearly set out strategies that have concrete, achievable aims and objectives, fully costed within clear timescales. And if there was any doubt that many support such a response, we should note that so far, it's estimated that between 15 to 26 million Americans have participated in demonstrations about the killing of Mr. George Floyd by a white policeman. It's the largest ever response seen in the USA against racism and shows that this is a job that can be done. We all know that schools have a crucial role in combating this, and that's the reason for our discussion today. We'll be asking our panel for their thinking about racism and how we can begin the urgent task of building solid and sustainable bulwarks against it. My name is Dr. Saima Rana, and I am the Chief Education Ambassador at the Varkey Foundation. Today, I have with me a very interesting panel who will help me understand better the situation that we live in today. We have Dr. Christine Callender, who is Associate Professor, University College London. Welcome, Christine. We have Dan McAteer, Ertegun Scholar in the Humanities, University of Oxford.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Dan.
Sorry.
No, not at all. We appreciate there's internet problems. It's not a problem. We have Miss Estella Owoimaha-Church teacher, Hawthorne High School, Los Angeles.
Good morning.
Good morning. And we have with us a very special student, Alero Aihevba from Roedean School in South Africa. Welcome, Alero. So, one of the things that I'd like to just point out is if our audience who are watching with us today have any questions, please do feel free to submit them in the live chat. And as we discuss these really important issues, we will try and bring in some of your questions. So, Estella, can we start, please? How do you think the growing anti-racism movement will change schools in the future?
Morning again, everyone. I guess I first want to say is that this isn't a trend. It's not new. It's not something that has just recently become popular. Black Lives Matter here in the United States took off around the death of Trayvon Martin. And I think that recently it has, I think that COVID has exacerbated issues of inequity that have already existed. And so I think we're just seeing a sort of new wave of this activism, of this work, but it is in no means new, right? If we're talking about racism, then we have to understand that racism is built into foundational systems and structures of our entire community, global and local. And so I think that this current or present movement, because of COVID, is especially important to pay attention to, because those inequities that have already existed and are now exacerbated live within our schools. And our schools, and as educators, we play an instrumental role in providing an anti-racist space for learners to grow up in or come up in. We also play a very crucial role in reshaping what society can look like, and be disruptive and dismantle racism in all of its forms and structures and systems.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's really important what you're saying, that this is not a trend. This is not something that's new. It has existed for a very long time. You know, one of the things you say about schools, and in particular at a time of COVID, you know, children have not been in school. They've been learning from home, online, or in under other sort of instruction. And it's been incredibly difficult for a lot of children to come to terms with what's happened in terms of Black Lives Matter recently, because it probably would have been the first time they're hearing about it. So Dr. Callender, what do you think teachers and students need to do to be able to participate in an open and honest conversation when they return to school, but also online as they're schooling at the moment?
Thank you. I think what we are talking about, in the same way that it's this discussion has quite a long history, I think we have to realize that it will take some time for
Dr. Callender, you're breaking up.
To take root in schools. I think we do have a very opportunity about race in schools. With that better?
Yes, a little better, a little better.
I think. Okay, I think what's important here really is that we have teachers and those who are involved in the education of children who have the tools within which to have that conversation. You know, someone who's been involved in training teachers for a very, very long time, I would say that currently the structures that we work to in teacher education in terms of the curriculum make it very difficult for us to have these meaningful conversations with beginner teachers. But the conversation has to start there. You need teachers who are knowledgeable about their own racialized identity, about the issues, who've got the tools to be able to go in and facilitate those conversations with children in school and with parents, in fact.
Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, I think that's such an important point in terms of, in particular, young new teachers, trainee teachers. One of the things that I've noticed is a lot of people feel incredibly uncomfortable about talking about racial inequality. It's really interesting in the teacher training programs I've been a part of, or where I've been delivering training. It's really, I find it extraordinary that people find it so uncomfortable to talk about racial inequality. And of course, we understand that every life matters, of course. But this agenda about the Black Lives Matters is about the injustice that has been done for many, many years. And that's what we've got to be able to openly talk about. So we've heard a little bit about what we can do with teachers. Alero, what do you think? How do you think students can help? How do you think we can ensure that students are part of this conversation and that they're able to openly talk in a safe space about discrimination and racism?
I think in order for students to get involved within discussions around racism, it's also for students to feel that they're safe enough to speak about their experiences of racism in private schools or wherever it may be to teachers, and not feel a sense that they will face backlash from what they say. Because I think a lot of students bottle up what they want to their experiences with racism, and it's kind of the fear of, you know, being labeled or stereotyped as the angry Black girl or whatever negative connotation that may come with it. I think it's important that schools understand that these issues probably better than sometimes teachers do, because we've seen what has been done in the past, and we understand that in order for change to happen, we need to be the ones on the forefront. And I think it's about giving students not only the space to speak up, but also the power to, make decisions that around transformation and discrimination policies within the school. So I think that's the way students can really feel like they're actually adding their voice within the system.
Thank you. Excellent. It's so important. You talk about giving children the confidence, making them feel safe and secure to be able to have these discussions. And that goes back to a curriculum. That goes back to really making sure that children feel confidence in their character. So it's about character building so that they have a voice. I hope that I'm a principal currently in a school in Westminster. And one of my students wrote the most beautiful article, 2-page article after Mr. George Floyd's murder. Beautiful article about how she was feeling. And she's 14 years old. I published it in the newsletter because I thought that I couldn't say it better. I would not have been able to say it better. And I also circulated it in our local media, in the local newspapers. And this young lady is so confident and passionate about this, the whole sort of Black Lives Matters, but also the inequality that exists today. And I do think that, yes, we need to make our students feel incredibly comfortable, incredibly confident to speak out about these things with their teachers and not feel afraid about it. So, Dan, what role do you think education, in particular teaching about race discrimination, what do you think? Where does that role fit in terms of schools and the curriculum?
I think it really is probably the single greatest thing you can do long term is ensure that there is wholesale curriculum decolonization. Because, of course, the schooling that I received compared to my parents was quite significantly better in terms of teaching the history of race and racism. But the potential we have going forward is just remarkable. We have vast amounts of academic expertise globally, which remains siloed in universities and sadly is quite disconnected from most school children's experience. So my view is if we can find better ways of connecting academic expertise on the history of empire, on the history of decolonization, on the history of neocolonialism, on the global history, basically, of race, rather than these kind of national histories alone, then I think the change in consciousness that you can bring about in the younger generation will be quite significant. Because I don't know what the other panelists think, but whenever I talk, especially to older white people of a generation or two above me, they often can't, they just don't get it. They really struggle to understand the very concept of structural racism. Whereas I find with younger people that they're much better.
Absolutely. And Dan, one of the things that I found is that when I speak to that is equal and respects everybody, but respects the past as well and the injustice that's been done in the past, and not just sort of close our eyes to it. If our teachers haven't been through that same educational provision, as you said, how do we do that? Is it an overhaul of the whole curricula, Dan? How do we do that, do you think?
I think it genuinely is very important to continue education amongst adults and teachers as well, because, if you look at university history curriculums compared to 20 or 30 years ago, there is really quite significant change afoot. It's not good enough yet, but there is significant change. And I'm not sure that has filtered through down into schools as much. And exactly as you say, I mean, if, a history teacher, for example, was brought up on a 1980s curriculum, then really, I think they have a lot of learning to do as well. And a lot of self-examination to do, because, I mean, frankly, this particular round of Black Lives Matters protests, of course, we had the others in 2016, have really forced me to acknowledge my white privilege in a way that I was kind of abstractly aware of in the past. But this has made it much more of a visceral awareness. So I think really we do need to be turning schools and school faculty or school teachers into their own mini kind of research facilities where they're learning about local history, family history, and about their local area, and continuing to have their own kind of dialogue with themselves and with their relationship to their communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we say that we live in a global community now, and most of our schools will talk about being a global citizen. You know, you'll see it somewhere. If it's not, you know, spelled out, it'll be in the discourse of what they're saying in terms of their vision and their purpose. Yet we don't connect with different types of heritage and culture, you know, through there's lots of ways you can do it. In my school, we do it through food technology, for example. We want to know what are the Caribbean dishes that your grandparents made, what are the Saudi or the Pakistani dishes that my parents made. We want to connect all of these lovely things because it's really important. It's really interesting that when we think about education and curriculum, and we think about how the two come together in order to make sure that our children are very strong, but also our teachers are very strong and our teachers are very confident. There is that issue there. Alero, in terms of in your experience, which I think is amazing, and I don't know if you can talk a little bit about it, what kind of things have you personally experienced, if any, in terms of behaviors that are unacceptable? Racist behaviors, perhaps online, or you don't have to talk about your own experiences, you can talk about those that you know of. Online racism, online bullying, because of the color of your skin or the skin of somebody else's. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. Where do I even start? I think the one that really I feel really passionate about is that, you know, when you're a person who is not afraid to speak about these issues and, you know, call out racist and call out racist behavior, the stereotype that follows you is the angry Black girl. Like, I mean, we've had incidences where, you know, girls have called out white students on their racism, and the response is, why are you attacking me? I feel attacked. But it's just simply calling out your racist behavior, and it's the automatic assumption that because I'm Black, I am aggressive. And even in terms of academically, you know, sometimes within like specific subjects like sciences and the biologies and the maths, it tends to be that, you know, if a Black girl is struggling within these spaces, it's kind of like, you know, you don't have to do these subjects. Like, they don't expect excellence from you, and it's not the same standard that they expect from white students within a schooling environment. So personally, for me, those are things that I've seen happening and I find extremely problematic.
It's so interesting, that point you've made, that racist behavior or discrimination, that type of behavior, it can be really quite, you know, it can go unnoticed if you're not smart enough to connect it when you're saying these subjects are not for you, perhaps, or they're far, and maybe the perpetrator or the member of staff doesn't know that's what they're doing. And these are the things that we've got to educate people with. The other thing is, Alero, always speak up. Don't not speak up, because we need people to speak up, because if we had people to speak up that had spoken up, we perhaps wouldn't be here today. So we do need to speak up. And one of the things I always say to my children is that, my students, is that if you hear something bad or you see something bad, you know, you have to do something. And it doesn't mean you put your life in danger. You don't have to do that. You just have to tell somebody. You never, ever stand by and not say anything, because if you do, I firmly believe then you are part of it. You must speak up always. So I'm very proud of you. I'm sure your head teacher is very proud of you in terms of speaking out and being confident to speak out. So what are the best ways of making every child, Estella, what are the best ways of making every child feel at home in their school community, but also in the wider community at home? Because we know sometimes parents have very interesting views as well, and sometimes they can be borderline racist and discriminatory. So how do we make sure that we are making every child feel comfortable in both home and school?
Great question. I want to, I think, circle back to something that Dan said earlier too, and respond to that question. There's a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me by James Lowen. And in the book, he says that if we want students to fall in love with history, then we must first begin with the truth. And I think that is actually, to your question, is exactly where it begins in your classroom spaces or your learning spaces with students. Being honest and open and vulnerable is very important in building strong relationships with learners. Students should feel very comfortable, like Alero is saying, to challenge anything I'm saying, and challenge one another. If you've built a foundation where love and empathy thrive, and every student feels safe, then those really, really hard conversations are, I don't want to say easy to have. They're still difficult, but they definitely happen organically and regularly. And this summer, for summer school here, I've spent the entire summer teaching decolonizing curriculum and teaching way away from the standard that we would be teaching in the classroom during the regular school year. One, because the summer program I teach for allowed for it, which is one, I want to say that leadership is extremely instrumental in doing this work. It can't all fall on just the classroom educator. While we play a very instrumental role, administrators and leadership have to create a culture and climate where teachers feel safe to even broach some of these topics, and where students, passing through the hallway, social time, they feel comfortable, like Alero is saying, standing up and saying something. And I spent the entire summer focusing on local histories that are often forgotten in our neighborhood, and tying it to this national and global conversation around Black lives and making Black lives matter and standing in defense of Black lives.
Great response, Estella. Great response. I think that's really, it's absolutely true. One of the things that you talk about in terms of the decolonization of the curriculum and what you're doing at the moment, that's amazing. Thank you. That's brilliant. Because one of the things that I feel that when I'm at a meeting or at a conference, people talk about displays, and they talk about having Black characters in storybooks, and they talk about celebrating Black History Month for 1 month of the year. And I just think, no, it's deeper than that. It's got to be deeper than that, because if we're serious about this, we have to go deep. And one of the things you've said, it's about the truth. It's about the truth and facing the truth. And no matter how uncomfortable it is for whoever's truth it is, we have to accept it, because we can't move on until we accept it. And we are role models to our children. And if we can't be seen to be accepting that mistakes have been made, and perhaps the way we've taught the curriculum mistakes have been made, how will children learn? And the other point you make is about your local community, your local heritage. What a fascinating point. So Dan, I want to come to you. How does a school teach anti-racism or teach about history and culture to a school where it has a specific type of population, perhaps one culture? And then how does a school do the same when it has 95 different nationalities, say?
Yeah, I think it's quite a tough problem, isn't it? Because I think there's a huge risk of us teacher blaming too much, because in a school, for example, like yours, Dr. Rana, Westminster Academy, where you have such huge cultural and ethnic diversity, it is frankly impossible, I think, for every teacher to brush up on, get strong on British Imperial South Asian history, East African, West African, South African, North African, all these different nationalities that you have. It's frankly unrealistic to expect all teachers to develop a genuine, holistic and deep understanding of the family histories and stories which every child has come from. And so for me, I really am huge on the idea of breaking down the barriers between higher education and schools. And, yes, we need government leadership on that, but there's huge potential for civil society groups to do that as well, because we have legions of PhD students, many of which are from the very backgrounds which we want our teachers to learn about, who are frankly cash strapped. They could do with the extra income. They're hugely passionate about their subject. And if we can somehow link these PhD students with the school children and with the teachers, then I think we could really develop a much more flexible model to teaching history based on local context, rather than the kind of rigid national histories that we're kind of used to, if that kind of answers the question.
Yes, definitely. I think that's a really good idea, and it's a great strategy to be able to link PhD students to schools in particular, because the schools that I'm referring to are those that are incredibly vulnerable at the moment, and in poverty-stricken areas. And I'm very pleased, Dan, that you mentioned Westminster Academy, because I mustn't mention it too much, but it is a great school, as you know, and we have lots of different nationalities, and the children are beautiful, and they are so confident to speak about racism and discrimination, speak out against it, because of the schooling that we've given them, but also their parental environment has been incredibly important. They are able to absolutely talk passionately about the wrongs and the rights, whether it's their own culture or other cultures, as you know, Dan. So, Dr. Callender, how can other schools give children the tools to be able to really take action against racism and discrimination?
Okay, I think we actually have a framework already.
Dr. Callender, you are so interesting, and I want to know what this framework is. And but you have frozen on us, and you've frozen on us. We can't hear you. So I'll come back to you.
I don't think we're very good at using it. I think.
Okay. Well, Dr. Callender, I'm so sorry, but you're breaking up, and we can't really hear you. Do you mind if I
far more?
Let me come back to you, Dr. Callender. Thank you. So, Dan, what kind of tools do you think we can give children well, not teachers, we've discussed teachers. Dan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry, could you ask that again there?
Yes, of course.
I didn't quite get the end of it.
No, of course. Sorry. So we talked a little bit about the kinds of things we can do. And you, as I said, you know Westminster Academy well, and we do lots of things to equip our children. But what can other schools do you think, to equip their children to make sure that they can, well, to ensure that they're equipped to fight racism and discrimination? What can we do?
Well, I mean, it may be at risk of repeating myself, but I'm very much conscious of being here as frankly someone. I grew up in a multicultural community, and it's only recently that as someone who grew up in Hackney, as a white person, I'm becoming aware of my privilege. And I think we really need to focus on raising awareness among white teachers, actually, especially in schools where the majority of the population is white, where the school children are white, because I think teaching a majority white school about racism is so radically different in the gulfs of meaning between how adjacent the school children are to the lived experience of racism, that we need really strong leadership from governments globally on that, because I think you're dealing with quite a different anthropological issue there, if that makes any sense at all.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that it context really matters, doesn't it? And the local environment really matters when we're equipping our children. Estella, what further funding do you think? Dan speaks a little bit about the government and leadership. What further funding do you think schools need in terms of purchasing or investing in resources, training, etc.? What kind of funding do you think governments can support schools with?
Great question, Dan. Brilliant answer. Yeah, I think moving forward, it's very important to educate white teachers and white students on these issues. In terms of funding, if we recognize that racism is systemic and deeply rooted in all meta systems within our society, education, healthcare, and everything else in between, then we can begin to understand that racist behaviors or racist outcomes or programs that may inadvertently cause discrimination or pain or trauma for someone are tied to the priorities of whatever these organizations and systems are. And those priorities are usually outlined within budgets, right? Like if an organization is claiming that their priority or their work revolves around, let's just say, empowering and uplifting young girls of color, but your budget items are not reflective of this claim or your mission or your vision, then you need to start like right there, and either reevaluate, reassess, but fund the programs or priorities that you claim are very important to you. And that starts from the top and should function the same way at the local level. I think that governments have, and I can only speak to my context here in Los Angeles, but we have spent, and this is something that you will see around or coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement, this conversation around defunding police. And I'm not asking, whether you stand for or against this concept of defunding the police, but if you look at the budgets of our local cities and municipalities, in my local area, which is a pretty small part of Los Angeles, more than 50% of our city's budget goes to our police force, and not even a decimal of that are going to our local schools. And in our small community, we have several school districts kind of living on top of one another. And in addition, our schools, the district I serve in, is paying to have police officers on our campuses. So not only does the city's budget reflect that more than 50% of its priority goes into police and Black and brown bodies within our community, because our community is primarily Black and brown and immigrant. But we're also going to underfund all of the schools in your community. And there lies a huge problem and shows us very clearly and plainly where the priorities are in our community.
Thank you, Estella. Thank you, Estella. Great response. The other thing that when you talk about funding and governments and not ring fencing, that's not what you said, but if you've got ring fenced funding for a specific project, for example, it makes leaders be able to focus on the right things with the support and guidance of the government, I would say. Now, I know that 4 or 5 years ago in the United Kingdom, there was a real issue with white working class, in particular boys, and there was government funding. And when you read policy papers, the discourse was across the entire text was all about white working class boys underachieving. But actually, when you look at the statistics, Black Afro-Caribbean boys were also underachieving. But there was no government at that time. There was no government sort of push about it. It was all about white working class boys, who are incredibly important, very important. But it's just that, again, it's that inequality, and it's not fair. It's not fair. What do you think, Alero?
I think in terms of when it comes to speaking about issues, I think people don't tend to understand intersectionality and how sometimes problems affect us. We can share a common struggle, but what makes us different is the fact that we have different privileges coming from, whether it's white, financial, or whatever it may be. But I think what tends to happen is that a lot of times in society, we tend to focus on issues when it affects a certain demographic, which tends to be white people. So until it affects white people, society doesn't take up and look at what's happening, So I think that's quite a big issue.
Absolutely. It is a big issue, and we really do need to accept that this is an issue, and we need to confront it head on. So, Dr. Callender, I hope we can hear you, because I'm really interested in your views, and I'm so sorry that the connection's not great for you. But let's try again with you. What do you think can happen outside of schools and education to help us really unpack this? What, for example, media, what can happen outside of schools to support this really, really important part of education that we are not getting right at the moment?
I think there are numerous conversations taking place about race and at this particular
I'm going to have to stop you again, Dr. Callender. I'm so sorry. I think what would be useful, because we want to hear what you have to say, we've got the live chat. And if you could just put a few comments in the live chat for me to read out, because I'm really interested in your response, please.
I think we...
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What can I come to you, Dan? What do you think? So can you respond to these 4 points? One, what can happen outside of schools to help us better inform and prepare society? Because that's what we're doing as educationalists. So what can we do there? Secondly, do you want to say a bit about higher education and BME? And then thirdly, what's the way forward with this? How does this all relate together? Thank you, Dan.
I mean, in a nutshell, structural racism requires structural solutions. And that means that, unfortunately, it's not going to be easy, because structural change involves funding. It involves difficult decisions and difficult conversations. So that's one big challenge. But in terms of higher education, there is a quite concrete example of some hope in the British context, which is over the past decade, through the campaigning of MPs like David Lammy, who's a Black British MP, represents a very diverse community in North London. Because of constant media pressure, he has, not single-handedly, it's been part of a wider process, but really started to transform the amount of resources, effort and attention which elite institutions in the UK, like Oxford and Cambridge, give to better representation. And that includes white working class, but it particularly is focused on ethnic minority representation. But the great risk of this is that Oxford, for example, will very proudly trumpet its overall BME. So is that a UK term? But anyway, Black and minority ethnic percentage. But what we're neglecting is how that breaks down within different ethnic groups. So, for example, British Indian heritage students have been overrepresented compared to their proportion of the population for a decade now, nearly. Whereas British Pakistani and British Bangladeshi are historically and continue to be underrepresented. Similarly, Black African heritage, particularly West African heritage students, are now, and we should celebrate this, slightly overrepresented in Oxford admissions compared to their percentages of population. But we continue to fail, really terribly fail, Black Afro-Caribbean heritage students. And so there is a risk that, although we're celebrating improved BME statistics in higher education, we are somewhat hiding behind that big concept of BME and forgetting the kind of historical reasons for continued kind of Afro-Caribbean exclusion from our elite institutions.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. Absolutely. That's really interesting about the figures that you quote there. It's really, really interesting. What do you think, Estella, what do you think we have to do in terms of making sure that the importance of ethnicity and religious diversity is celebrated with staff and students in a school? How do school leaders make that happen?
I think it's a whole host of different things, but creating a culture and climate where all students feel welcome and loved, and know that they're safe. But also it is about centering our most marginalized, and uplifting and not being afraid to uplift those who are most marginalized. Alero mentioned intersectionality, which I think is extremely important part of this entire conversation, and should be talked about, right? Like, I can't separate my race and ethnicity as a Nigerian, Samoan American. I can't separate those from my gender, or anything else, but also at the same time in recognizing my multifaceted identity, recognizing all the privileges that I do still have as an able-bodied person. And I think that conversations around inequality move us away from conversations around inequity. As an educator, if I have a student with special needs in my classroom, I'm going to work really hard and diligently to support that student. And strategies and tools that I might use to support that student most likely or oftentimes will also support other students who may not share in the same disability, but we center that child, we uplift that child, and encourage them and make sure that they are able to meet whatever the academic standard is by, you know, helping them with whatever their issue or condition might be. But we can approach these really tough conversations around race and ethnicity and gender in a very similar way. If we center our most marginalized, and right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, we're saying we need to center Black lives, and that's Black, all Black lives, Black women, Black LGBTQ, all Black lives, right? We need to center these lives right now in this national and global conversation. And we can do that on our school campuses, right? Because in a certain community, perhaps the most marginalized, to Dan's point, is not a Black student, but the most marginalized could be, in some neighborhoods here, maybe it is a Cambodian student, maybe it is a Mexican American student, maybe it is a Pakistani student. Then that student needs to feel whole and safe at all times. And the entire community, that whole school community, should be able to feel free, feel comfortable, centering that person, uplifting that person, and then doing the same for everyone else on that campus.
Thank you so much. Dr. Christine, can we try you again? Can we? Are you able to speak to us?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Nope, you've gone again. That's fine, not to worry. I was just very interested to know about your views, really, about the media and the rhetoric that media uses, and governments, and the sort of, as I said earlier, the discourse of governments in terms of. I can hear you. Yes, now I can hear you. But I don't think it's going to work. I'm so sorry, Dr. Callender. What a shame. But I was really interested in wanting to really know about the rhetoric in the media, headlines in the media. I wanted to know about government policy and how can we make this better so that, as Dan and Estella have just said, that we're looking at the actual subsections of cultures and race and people, rather than just saying this is the group, because it doesn't work like that. I don't know, Dan, what do you think?
I think, just very brief point, we have to recognize just the enormous power of the media as both enemy and potential ally, because you're completely right that the perpetuation of negative stereotypes through the media and the vilification of refugees and immigrants is just one of the single greatest contributors to continued experiences of oppression globally. But at the same time, unfortunately, you know, the nature of the modern world is that keeping issues in the news is fundamental to actually mobilizing and putting momentum behind addressing them. So I think we need to be canny, and I think educational reformers within the system need to recognize that radical young reformers from sort of outside the system, for example, Rhodes Must Fall in South Africa, or indeed BLM in America and the UK, there is a relationship of symbiosis between the kind of more establishment reformers and between the radicals, because the radicals are often fantastic at continuing to keep such issues in the news. And that gives us space to kind of say, hey, government, unless you do something about this, these radicals are going to keep causing you trouble and that kind of thing. So I think we need to implicitly work together hugely.
Absolutely. It's absolutely about collaboration, partnership, and not tolerance, but real genuine acceptance of different people, because we are all different. None of us are the same. And it really is about partnerships and collaboration. Alero, I want you to sort of finish off this panel discussion by just saying to me and to the audience and to the panel, what do you think schools can do to make this better? What do we do?
I'm not sure if there's one singular answer to or action that can dismantle white supremacy within schooling systems, but I think it's a continuous action of applying anti-racist policies and not treating racism like a mental illness, but rather as an inherent bias and something that needs to be fixed. And it's not something that someone should be babied into or felt, you know, that they do need help, racists do need help, but they shouldn't feel like, you know, it's acceptable. And I feel like a lot of times in schools, it's a thing of trying to comfort the feelings of people that have been accused of racism rather than dealing with the trauma that they've caused to mainly Black and brown bodies within the schooling system. So I think in terms of going forward, it's really hard to say. I think it's a thing of having anti-racist approach and being willing to listen and have these hard conversations and including people and hiring staff that truly understand what transformation is and what it requires from them as students, as teachers, because they're the ones that hold power within the system. And they need to understand that, you know, students need to feel safe within the space to speak about, you know, whatever form of discrimination that may be happening within the schooling environment.
Alero, you were just so brilliant. That was so beautifully said. Thank you so much. You honestly, I mean, I hope I'm not coming across patronizing. You were absolutely brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I want to read out a comment from Dr. Callender. She aligns very much with what Alero has just said. It's really about needing to sort of build a purposeful space, creating a space to be able to talk about race and discrimination. This means accepting that we are all different at different points, at different starting points. Teachers need skills in racial literacy to be able to facilitate structured and meaningful conversations so they too can commit to learning about race. And that goes back to what our panel have been talking about. And Dan mentioned this, and we heard it earlier from Estella and from Dr. Callender as well, that we have to invest in training. We have to invest in training to make sure that our teachers have the tools to be able to look after our children, because our children are incredibly important. I want to take this opportunity to really thank my panel. What a great panel discussion. And where has the time gone? We've heard from the panel that there's no doubt that this is such an important and unavoidable issue for schools. Everybody agrees that schools and children have to play a massive role, a big role. We've also heard that the curriculum is really important. We've heard that the leadership around these issues is so important. We've heard that engagement with all stakeholders is important and vital at this point. We've heard that parental, governmental, and the media need to understand their role in educating society. Dan's point about how powerful the media is and their use of words and phraseology is incredibly important. We need and have heard that politics is going to have to respond to what is happening at the moment. I suggest governments need to commit themselves to a full anti-racism agenda. The law plays its role in making sure media outlets are not biased or discriminatory. I think that's incredibly important. I suggest that schools and universities must commit to an anti-racist and anti-discriminatory principles in everything that they do and focus on social justice agendas. Our message to our global teacher fraternity is that you're teaching the curriculum, your curriculum honesty and the ethics will bring about truth, and that will bring about change. Change will happen. You must create patterns in your teaching and your students' learning that builds confidence in who they are and who you are. You never change things by fighting, I believe. I really do believe that. I think peaceful demonstrations are great, but you never change things by fighting. To change things, build a new ideal, create symbols of how things could be so that we build momentum and we build things and a world that is much better than we've ever known before. Let's build a future that we want to live in. Everyone is valued, everyone is looked after, everyone is accepted, because in my opinion, there is only one race, and that is the human race. And You know what? We all belong to it. This has been Talking Education with the Varkey Foundation, and we look forward to seeing you at the next discussion. Take care. God bless.